Thank you, and we are delighted to have this fantastic panel this evening. To my left, we have Ms. Naina Kidwai, who was the Chief Executive of the HSBC Bank, very eminent thinker in the field of climate finance, recently completed an inquiry on sustainable financing ecosystems, and I was associated in the very early part of that report with Ratin and others, and I think it was a fantastic effort to put together a framework which could lead to at least a discussion and progress on generating and mobilizing capital for green investments. To her left, we have Mr. Jairam Ramesh, whose remarkable influence has also been recorded by Hillary Clinton in terms of the climate debate. But certainly, if we have reached a certain space where the emerging world and the developed world have found some area of convergence, he was one of the early proponents. I think during your term in your ministry, we did take a few steps forward in many ways, sensing the opportunity if we were to make the right choices. And of course, Gabriela has been with us this evening, and she needs no introduction. Let me start with you, Mr. Ramesh. When in 2009, you were one of the vocal defenders of a progressive climate posture for India, and of course, your own party mates were to change that a few years down the road. But when you were making this pitch for India to take this bold move and become a leader in terms of climate action, you were obviously assuming that there would be a flow of finance and technologies that would aid and support many of these transitions we were hoping to achieve. And you were also hopeful that India would be able to find its own capital market depth to underwrite many of these initiatives. Sitting in 2018, what are your views on were you overly optimistic? Have we moved a fair distance? What could have we done better?
Well, in 2009, when the paradigm shift was effected, my negotiators were opposed to it, my own government colleagues were opposed to it, and certainly the opposition parties were opposed to it. So it was a culture shock to try to get this thinking in the Indian consciousness that we need to be proactive and be part of the solution, even though we may not have been part of the problem. And being part of the solution means abandoning this theological approach based on per capita emissions, where everything per capita is low, based on per capita emissions. And a slight correction, Samir, to what you said. The paradigm shift in 2009 was not dependent on the flow of finance and technology. That was key, that India has the capability to raise resources on its own, that India has the capability of developing technologies on its own, and we should not link domestic climate change actions, mitigation and adaptation, to flows of finance and technology. This was an anathema to generations of Indian climate negotiators and the political establishment. We had 4 debates in Parliament, 2 before Copenhagen and 2 after Copenhagen. And then when Cancun came, we had another debate. And I'm very happy that the people who opposed me in Copenhagen and Cancun became the greatest champions of climate action in Paris. So, this is the old philosophy, which everybody knows. Where you stand depends on where you sit. So I was, in 2009, I had no hope that this was going to be the conventional wisdom, but today it is. And we are proactive, we are far more aggressive, we are far more ambitious. Our level of ambition, particularly on renewables, has been increased almost 5-fold, and all this is to be welcomed. But I do want to say that my philosophy has always been that we do things because it is in our interest. We don't do things based on finance coming from outside, technology coming from outside. We must do it autonomously. And I agree with my friend Rajiv that we should not, official assistance here and there may have some little niche roles to play, but private capital markets, private investment is going to be key. And I think in the last decade, looking back, I think it was the right transition we made in 2009. It was an acrimonious transition.
Correct.
It was a bloody transition. It was a transition in which the media, also played a very important role. But today, the recognition that India must take domestic actions on its own is firmly embedded in the national consciousness because it is in our interest, and it's because we are the country that is most vulnerable to the vagaries of climate change.
But sir, when you made that paradigm shift in our approach to climate, and in more ways than one, in many ways not depending on international assistance, seeing and sensing an opportunity and creating your own architecture for responding to it, there must have been some fundamental assumptions that institutions will change or will be able to respond to that paradigm shift.
Absolutely none. Absolutely none. I didn't believe Hillary Clinton when she went in Copenhagen and announced $100 billion Green Climate Fund. In fact, the Green Climate Fund for me was a sleeper as far as I was concerned. I didn't waste a single moment worrying about climate finance or technology because there is, this whole IPR issue which bedeviled climate negotiations is a bogus issue. IPR is important for the pharmaceutical industry. It's irrelevant as far as large sections of climate industry is concerned. But however, we got locked into it. So as far as climate finance is concerned, Samir, I was not at all hopeful that we were going to get large flows. We had to access these flows. We had to go out. We had to negotiate, and prices would fall. I think one of the important things that happened was the low carbon report, which came out in 2014, which Kirit Parikh chaired, because that was the report that really econometrically established that the growth sacrifice from a low carbon strategy is not very significant. That, in fact, what the Parikh committee, and Rajiv knows about it, the Parikh committee would spend 2 years. In fact, setting up the Parikh committee itself was a big task.
Correct.
Because there were large sections of the government which didn't want this. However, it took 2 years and they demonstrated that a low carbon strategy over a 20-year period leads to only a shaving of 0.1 to 0.15 percentage points from the GDP growth. In other words, you're not sacrificing GDP for going into a low carbon thing. So that was a very important intellectual foundation for succeeding governments, both at the national level and the state level. And they also quantified, if you remember, the total volume of resources that are required, and it was not. See, these are investments you're going to make anyway. If you're going to change your power industry, if you're going to change the nature of your coal-based industry, if we're going from subcritical to supercritical plants, that's an investment that you're going to make in any case as part of your private investment and public investment program. If you're going to go and increase the mix of renewables, that's an investment that you're going to make anyway. So these are not add-ons for which we need to depend on finance. And frankly, the solar revolution that is taking place in the last few years, going from 3 gigawatts to 12 gigawatts, am I right? 12 gigawatts now. So, I mean, the revolution that's taking place, I think it's not been dependent on we waiting and say we need the finance, we need the technology. Cost? Sorry?
It's 22.
Now it's 20, 22 man, 20. Okay, that's even better. So, if we have reached the target which was originally set for 2022, and that was not dependent on any finance flows or technology flows. Prices fell dramatically. I remember 2009 when the solar price was 17 rupees a unit. We are now talking of what, 2.5 rupees, less than 3 rupees a unit. So it's been a dramatic fall, and India has, I think, benefited from that windfall.
No, I've always argued that this is not only an opportunity for us, but the way we are getting the pricing right, I think we are also a lab for the rest of the emerging world. If we can get this right, while China can be the hardware and manufacturer, but the way we are integrating and delivering pricing to these new populations that now are seeking energy for the first time, we could be a template for exports as well going forward. And I think that's
one small point I want to make. The position that I took in Copenhagen and Cancun was climate finance should be focused on Africa, should be focused on AOSIS countries, it should be focused on the Bangladeshis and the Maldives, those types of countries. And India and China have no business making a demand on green climate finance. We should be doing it on our own, frankly.
In fact, we should be contributing to it.
Yeah, we should be in fact contributing to it. And the priority for the Green Fund was, in my view, to be on Africa and the AOSIS countries.
I'll come back to you, Mr. Ramesh. Let me go to Ms. Kidwai. In your 2016 report, which I think is really a remarkable document because it puts together many important conversations into one report, delivering a sustainable financial system, you have actually hit the nail on the head by actually targeting the $305 trillion assets held by banks, investors, financial institutions, and individuals in the global financial system. And both Mr. Ramesh and Dr. Kumar have actually stressed that that is the kind of capital we need to access. And you have also mentioned in that report that a very small segment of this big universe of private capital is participating at this particular time in the global efforts to create green infrastructure. In 2 years since then, have we made progress? Because you've been following the sector in your avatar with the UNEP, and have you seen progress? Have you seen more appetite in this segment?
So much as I'd like to take credit for everything that's in the UNEP report, I was a small part of it, as part of the International Advisory Council. And yes, we took the opportunity to drive an agenda for India, which we set up as the UNEP FICCI report, which you were a part of. And has a lot changed since then. We've had a huge change in the green bond market because we did work very hard to set up that infrastructure. SEBI has also now published its guidelines for what qualifies. And we've actually now emerged as the 8th largest issuer of green bonds. So at that end, we have had progress. There are many gaps. I think where we still don't have enough of a standard set is where banks should not lend. Very similar to the Equator Principles that went up for international finance, where large projects, there was an agreement across international banks of the standard that they would lend to. We have to have the standard in India because there's no point my bank saying no if there are 9 other banks there that are about to do it. So there was a standard. We worked at it quite hard through IBA. It then sort of went into the RBI. Some guidelines have emerged. But that standard has to be a standard for India. It need not be a borrowed standard from abroad that we all agree on in terms of what we will and will not do. So that more at the bank financing end. The capital markets in India are clearly still an issue. When you look at our debt markets, irrespective of green or not, there is an issue. So certainly focus there helps. And where we lack, frankly, talent today is the certification for what is green. Mm-hmm. So I can issue a green bond, but the basic understanding of green financing is renewables, which is fine because renewables are green, but there's a huge area out there of energy efficiency, of the right style of urban projects, the translation of green finance and where green bond financing can go to certification of what qualifies as green needs to be expanded. Mm-hmm. And that whole process of audit, certification, and application of mind is really still missing. So the money is really pretty much going into the renewable space. I would like to see a lot more around building efficiency, mobility projects, transportation. And the third area, which we are, I think, dismal in, is the whole municipal bond financing area. I mean, many countries have funded themselves through municipal bonds. But unless we can get financing done through our urban local bodies, who then drive the entire urban low carbon environment, becomes critical. And I like the municipal bonds because that financing comes with a lot of strictures. Mm-hmm. And those strictures are part of the contract. So the municipality that has raised money has to adhere to that contract, unlike, sort of bank financing, where these strictures are not maybe put in quite the same way. So we can actually use this to drive change. And the way that we could drive finance, and I agree with Jairam that money it's there, but what we don't have is the regulation and incentive structure which drives money where we want it to go. So if we were to focus on that the financing should go to projects that look of a certain style and way, and that it will not go to projects which pollute or do not work to a certain level of energy efficiency. And let's work to energy efficiency, because we are a net importer of energy. So we are short energy. So it has many, many elements to it, not just the low carbon sort of space, but guide money to where it needs to go and treat that as a tool would be certainly a way to do this.
Ma'am, you have also in that report grappled with the issue of intellectual property and that being a barrier to attracting investments. Mr. Ramesh feels that that's something which is clearly a market decision. And unless you are able to respond to that market anxiety, there is a problem. Have you seen progress in India on that front? Have you seen greater sensitivity? So I don't think the policies have changed, but is there an appreciation that intellectual property protection is important in some of these frontier sectors, especially around storage and some other technologies? So
I haven't heard too much about concerns on the IPR regime in the climate space. So I think Jairam's absolutely right that that's a bit of a bogey out there. Technology comes where the market exists, and the way technology moves, that IPR is almost irrelevant if you look at the speed at which we are seeing change in whether it's storage technology or indeed even the film technologies that are lowering costs today of solar panels. So no, that isn't really, to my mind, a big concern. And in any case, India is now seen as more and more compliant, so it's not like we are not moving in the right direction on some of this. But having said that, I think what we do need focus on is projects that are credible. Just being in renewables, and I meet many startup sort of guys who are like, hey, we're doing this great thing and we should just get the money because we're doing the right thing. But the issue still remains the project has to be financeable. Nobody is going to piss away money giving money to a startup just because it's a startup in the right space. That money has to come from venture capital, and it's a very different kind of money, of which we don't have enough. So we need venture capital, which is, we need de-risking models. We need projects which are financeable so that the funds can flow in all these buckets, and there are different types of funds. Risk funds for the new startups and those which come with maybe IPRs but are not yet tested as marketable on the one hand, and on the other, the big projects which are not seen as credit worthy and therefore either need credit enhancement or proper project planning.
I think you've raised a very important point, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Ramesh, after I ask Gabriela a couple of questions around her work. But I want to just leave this thought with you. She's raised a very important point. The way we structure, the way we give agency to our local bodies perhaps hinders the ability of those bodies to be able to go into markets, raising money, and then making sure the money reaches where we need them. So maybe we need to rethink the governance architecture if we need to be able to fully capitalize on this moment. Gabriela, at the OECD, and certainly in the field of climate and investment, what is the OECD's role besides being the most high-profile think tank of the world? How are you in this particular institution helping various actors access and mobilize financial flows?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm very honored to be with these two very well-known speakers on those issues. I have to say that if you go back some years ago, we were still grappling with this question of whether climate was man-made or not, and whether we could get into any kind of agreement or not. So I think that this is commendable, and it takes a lot of courage, not only from institutions or leaders, but also from ex-ministers and parliamentarians, but also the financial sector. So I have to say, and bring your question a little bit back, because the OECD has been the institution that for many years, even before Mr. Gurria arrived, but when Mr. Gurria arrived with more force, we started to make a lot of noise with our evidence, in the sense that we were in a collision course with nature, and in the sense that the way the growth model has been producing very suboptimal outcomes in the economic or the inclusion or the inequalities, it was also producing quite a very dim and worrisome perspective. So the question is not only the investment, but the fact that we started working on how to dewire our economies from carbon. And for that, you need the economic instruments that you have been referring to, and the incentives in building a new kind of economies. It's not easy because, of course, we create the evidence. That's what we do. We put the evidence together. The fact of saying, yes, you will get 2.5 growth by 2050 if you go through this low carbon economy. But wait, that's a beautiful modeling work that puts you in just a normal condition. The fact is that why don't you add up what you are, the cost that you are avoiding by not getting against nature, which is double. And so we get into 5%. Because all these intangibles of the cost of not getting the climate policies right are never considered in the liabilities line, but it's a liability. And we say 5%. So I think this is a very important. But then the question of the how, because we got the what, thanks to the minister, thanks to all those that were engaged. I still remember in the G20 the discussions that we had in Antalya. Anthony was in the working group on energy and climate, and it was the most difficult question. We can get into that afterwards. But then the point was, how do we align the policies? How do we get it from an environmental conversation to an economic discussion, to a financial discussion? How do we get the instruments right? And this is not easy. It's not easy not because you don't have the evidence, but because there are lots of vested interests. There are lots of investment that have been made that will not change. So it doesn't matter how much you go for stranded assets, it doesn't matter how you go for due diligence, it doesn't matter how you, if we don't change the way these things work, and if we don't go for the political economy that requires to be done. We have with us Robert Yeoman, who is the head of the climate, the OECD Center for Green Climate and Investment, and we are looking into all those issues, trying to document what kind of projects have been successful in which countries. You have mentioned some of your undertakings, but I think that it's very important that we scale this up and try to change the way the financial sector operates to turn these funds into real flows to what needs to be addressed. But we need a whole of a government approach, as I said, because we need to align policies. If we just stop doing what we know damage the environment, if we stop financing subsidies for fossil fuels, for example, I think we will be doing a lot of more good for the world. So this is something we need to take forward. We also help countries. So what the OECD does, as I said, it brings all this evidence, it brings all this analysis, it convenes all these countries that want to do things differently. We produced this report that I mentioned for the G20 to show how it was feasible to integrate these elements. We have the climate center. We have also the following from the report that Chancellor Merkel asked us. We launched a project that is the Climate Futures Rethinking Infrastructure. And this is the question: how do we get these trillions into infrastructure, and how do we change the regulatory frameworks to make it profitable, because the flows are not going to go there if it is not profitable. And then how do we help countries implement these issues? And we're working with several emerging economies with the Clean Energy and Finance Investment Program, because you can go into very big designs, very big comments. What you need to do is what our, my former speakers and Mr. Kumar mentioned. You need to get into the nitty-gritty and the context. Which financial markets? How deep? How are the flows? Who are the investors? For example, BlackRock, I'm carrying also the gender agenda in the OECD. They said, okay, I'm not gonna give finance to those companies that don't have a good representation of women in the board. What about that kind of very simple, straightforward rules for the institutional investors? I don't finance coal. Well, that will be a fantastic message. And then, of course, the OECD could be continued developing the best instruments and how to really make it work in the design. But the reality is that we need to move away from financing the kind of economy that we have been financing up to now.
So, we heard both Mr. Kumar and Mr. Ramesh, and in fact, even Ms. Kidwai say the same thing, that, we are pretty much going to raise money through our own means. Now, what is the use of a forum like G20, and you are a Sherpa to the G20 from the OECD, what is the use of a forum like G20 for a country like India, other than being another talk shop of people exchanging and boasting about their own performances and futures? So what do we really gain from that process? And since you sit inside and you are someone who's familiar with the process, why should an Indian taxpayer be investing so much in being part of this G20 conversation when we are pretty much doing what we need to do here?
I think the G20, and I have to let me say.
And I'm being provocative, okay? I mean, I like the G20.
No.
I'm part of the T20, so it also is my bread and butter. So.
No. I completely agree with you. I mean, these processes are more complicated than they look, and they are, of course, very difficult to communicate. I think the G20 has delivered much more than what you can imagine. I think it's all about people. And just having all these leaders around the table, sharing knowledge, sharing better understanding, building a common understanding on issues. And I have seen countries, including India, I have to say, because it was because of we know whom and many other people in India, that the person that was sitting in the G20 was no longer opposing anything related to climate and anything related to any commitment. But I think that it also took for the G20 group to get together and move forward into a common understanding. And for that, I think that the OECD made some contribution, but I think that there was also the leadership around the table who was convinced that this was happening. There was a very interesting, and these kind of discussions happened at the G20. The French presidency of the COP21 asked the OECD to produce the famous 100 billion report, because there were all these discussions whether the advanced economies were producing or not, channeling the funds that they committed in Copenhagen or not. We were not mandated to do so. But the French presidency said, do it. And my boss always takes risks, so he said, do it, and we have the best and the brightest to gather the numbers. We started to do it. You know what? The US, Caroline Atkinson, who was a very good friend of us, the Sherpa, said, why are you doing that? You don't have a mandate. It's only one country asking you. I said, I'm sorry, but these are the negotiations that is the more important, and they represent 180. We produced a 100 billion. We were scared to death, because for the OECD, the reputation is what matters. So we said, if it is too low, advanced economies are gonna kill us. If it's too high, too festive, developing countries are gonna say, come on, you're yes. It came to the middle, in a good horizon, let's say, but it came right. But we did it right. We really, the definitions, how to account for it, lots of criticisms, particularly from India, saying you're giving a lot of credit to X, Y, or Z. It didn't matter. The report helped to have a good conversation on evidence. And then Caroline, at the end, she said, thank you, which was not something you were, but she was really honest and said, thank you. And everybody told us, this is the most criticized report in public. Everybody was rejecting the conclusions. Everybody was, but the most useful report inside the discussions. So I think this is the kind of contributions we did also because we were in the G20. And I think the G20 makes things happen. We were a converging club. I think we were converging. China was converging, the US converging, Mexico was converging, India converged. We are now diverging. And this is the challenge of the G20. I have to say, my respects to the German presidency, because they kept the 19 together. How long can we be 19 together? I hope that forever, and that nobody's going to relinquish in their commitments, but it's very difficult when you have a very important country not really converging in terms of what are we going to do with the world.
Mr. Ramesh.
Gabriela, Samir has asked a typical Indian question. So you shouldn't be offended by that. The typical Indian question is, G20, OECD, useless. What do they do for us? The Chinese, on the other hand, never ask this question.
Never.
The Chinese ask the question, how can we use these guys
How can we buy them out?
to benefit us? That's the difference between the two. That's the difference between the two. And I tell you, Samir, the Chinese went to the OECD in 2006. And the best report on China's environmental policy, a 300-page report, was produced by the OECD. The Chinese just completely, it was an eye-opener for them. I tried to get a similar report prepared for India. No go. Just nobody was willing to, give a sign off on that. We know everything. We are doing everything. Rajiv, he's been part of the system. So it's very difficult to move this system. And I was amazed to see this OECD report on the environment. It was an analysis of China's environmental policy. It was a critical analysis. It said where China is going right, where China is going wrong. And I could see my Chinese counterparts, referring to that report, every time I was talking to them. So that's the difference.
No, I completely agree. Let me tell you.
I know you were provocative.
I was provocative.
But I guess,
Let me give you a very good example of making use of international institutions. The Chinese Poverty Reduction Center and the DAC at the OECD have partnered to promote the Chinese International Development Partnership model in Africa. So for example, when they did not have the vocabulary to engage with new stakeholders, they partnered with the OECD to start talking about the aid agenda for China. So I think the Chinese are very we have to up our game here. When I was waiting for the vice chairman to arrive, I was talking to an ambassador, I won't name him, and he says that we have the security forum where the Chinese are not allowed. There's a security forum which is only for the democracies. And the Chinese are pressurizing them to open it up to China. China wants to be in every room. And I think that's something, and that's my final question to you, ma'am, for this evening. Are we represented well enough in many of these arenas? Do we send our best minds and best voices to be part of these key conversations that take place at the OECD, G20, Basel, and you can go across the 1,000 odd conversations that will implicate global flows? Yeah. Are we realizing the importance of being present?
Well, maybe the issue really is there aren't enough voices and enough depth of understanding and research emanating from India. I think we need to pull this together. I give this as an example because under the auspices of the new climate economy, we started an India-China dialogue, which is entirely on issues to do with climate change. And there are many deep critical issues embedded in there. How to tackle pollution. I mean, both of us countries, just burning away people's lungs. And it connects back to low carbon economy, for example. And looking at the style of our cities, where China also frankly got it wrong. The cities are not coordinated, connected, and minimizing transportation. So the look of the new city and what it should be like. And China's just so greedy to learn. And the beauty of it is, which we have not today set up, is they've got some of the best climate champions and their ministers, their people who really get it. They've given the right rank, sitting in Tsinghua University, and they are their climate change negotiators. Those guys speak with an understanding, knowledge, and a direct line to President Xi, which we don't have such a body. So when our conversation happens, it's this sort of disparate lot of people who know a little bit here and a little bit there, and people like myself who are hardly the voice of the country the way it should be. So where is that think tank that we set up, which is like the climate negotiators in China? And by the way, these guys aren't just talking, they're doing, because they have a direct connect from the think tank to the doing. And so it doesn't just stop in the zone of, you know, how can we influence G20 and how we getting in there. They're actually going ahead and they're showing us plans. When we were there as part of a dialogue, they're showing us what they're doing with their bikes. They're showing us how they're moving their mobility messaging forward, what's working, what isn't, how they're struggling. Pretty open conversations. So we have to seize this space because we have the thinking, but it's sitting in too many pockets. It hasn't convened into a body which has government sanction beyond maybe what happens at Niti Aayog in order to actually have the voice of India seen as a voice.
Gabriela, final thoughts from you on your India agenda going ahead? I think Dr. Kumar already looked at you a few times when he was suggesting certain actions, course of action. So besides partnering with ORF, what else are you planning to do with India as the OECD?
Well, I think that India, just by the sheer size and the fact that you are growing at 7% instead of 2 or 1 in the rest of the world.
We are growing at 7% instead of 9, but that's a different matter.
Well,
so that's an Indian political debate.
No. The point is that there is a huge promise, and you can get it right, or you can get it wrong. You are going to be the youngest country, or you are the youngest country with an average age of 26 years. So demography is on your side. You have amazing technological indigenous developments, which are amazing, like what you're doing in terms of the IT system for recognizing all your citizens. And you are developing all these very advanced agendas in terms of how to get how to develop a growth model that really goes into delivering on the climate. Challenges we all know. I mean, the question of poverty, the question of how to really bring those regions and those people that are left behind. But I think that for us, it's a question of really looking at the promise, because you're building up, you're still building up. I have to make a point, because I always hear some of your compatriotas saying that the OECD is the advanced countries. I am Mexican. The OECD is run by a Mexican, so there has been a change. Brazil is wanting to join the OECD. Argentina wants to join the OECD. Colombia just joined the OECD. And we have this amazing program with India on many fronts. So I would say that for us is how do we work with India, learning from India, and also tailoring the kind of experiences that other countries have proved successful in terms not only in integrating these challenges into the growth model, but also to go into the nitty-gritty, manage water better, go for the circular economy. How do you do it in India? How do we really go for the mantra of reduce, reuse, recycle? How do we go in terms of developing, as you develop a strong financial sector, how do we develop the rules and the framework to really channel the funds to where it really are more needed? How do we get into this agenda of inclusive growth where you see that investing in climate or investing in education, investing in health are not costs, are investments. And are those elements that are going to allow India to really make it up into the development ladder. So there are many things I could say, but I feel that you got it right in so many ways, and what we learn from the crisis is that no one size fits all. And I think I have to say that we're also in an organization that has learned its own lessons, that we cannot just go around and thinking that promoting efficient markets is the only thing that matters. I think that we really need to go into understanding the countries, knowing what are the challenges, where you want to go, and how can we just bring the experiences of others, because we're not going to tell India what to do with India. I think you know better. But we can share the experiences of other countries on how they have advanced in their development pattern. And probably some countries that, as I said, are joining our ranks, and that might be more relevant for the Indian experience.
Thank you very much. I think this is a fascinating conversation this evening. Please join me in applauding Ms. Kidwai, Mr. Ramesh, and Ms. Ramos for a wonderful conversation. Many years ago, when I was starting out in the think tank sector, I was told, be careful with OECD. One of the really wise people told me, and I said I must go to OECD immediately. So whenever someone warns you that be careful of an organization, that is where you should go in India. And we were lucky that we did start collaborating with them many years ago, and that continues. So we look forward to a full day tomorrow. We have many of our speakers with us this evening. Let's enjoy dinner for now, and thank you very much for joining us. Thanks.